Hello, David Clarke here from DVC Training. Recently I've been updating sections of my EDIUS tutorial and I've just completely remade the whole effects section. So it's got the new EDIUS interface on it and also covering lots of stuff that wasn't in it before. And I thought, why not do a short video on various ways I speed up my editing when I'm doing this kind of thing. So these are just lots of little tricks that I use that help me work a little bit faster. So to make my tutorials, I just start up EDIUS and I use a screen capture program. I simply start talking and then make it up as I go. I found that's a lot better than writing a script because it comes off more natural and flowing, but it does mean I've got to edit a lot afterwards because I make mistakes and fluff stuff up. So obviously that's what I use EDIUS for. So here's a bit of video that I used for my tutorial, and you can see you drag it in here and it comes in with two different audio tracks. So I've got one which is the microphone and one which is the sound from the computer. Most of the time you don't hear the computer sound, so I generally just mute that track. And I use this one at the bottom. It records it in stereo. I like to put it to mono, just because I can see the waveform a bit better. So the first thing I do is I pop down here. I just want to select this audio track on its own, so hold down on Alt, so I can select the audio track. Right click and go to Properties, and here, instead of using channel 3 and 4, which is the stereo pair of my microphone, I'm going to go to mono, choose one of them, channel 3 or 4, and that just cuts it down to 1. Now the first thing I want to do is to try and make this sound come out a bit better. What I actually do is I use a couple of audio filters that I downloaded off the internet. So these are free audio filters. I'll talk about them a little bit later in the tutorial. And I use a noise gate and a compressor to try and even out the sound a bit. I like to put it on before I start chopping because then it's on everything all the way through. Now I've got a couple of settings that I use all the time, so I've made a preset and just popped it up here into the bin. But just to show you exactly what I do, I come along, I grab hold of the noise gate, which is this thing called G gate. I'll put a link to where you can download that in the description below. And I pop that on there. And then what I like to do is just sort of use this to chop out some of the really quiet sounds. I'm trying to get rid of all those sharp intakes of breath and pauses and any noise that's in between the talking. And I find the first thing I do is just whack on a noise gate. What level you put it at kind of depends on how good your sound is in the first place. I found with the way mine's been recorded, something about sort of 40-ish does the job. So what you've got to do to actually work out the level is to put it on here and then listen to the results. Let's just listen to this section here. To display light. Now you can see a little intake of breath in between those two, which I don't like and I want to clean up. What I do is I put on the noise gate program and then just fiddle around with the threshold till I can no longer hear. Now that to display light. Now this noise in the middle, this is without display light. Now, and this is with set to display light. Now the only problem is if you put the noise gate too high, then you could mess up other bits. So got a lot of like quiet audio down here. Color space of your project. So have a quick look at the color space chapter to see a bit more about it. Sounds all right to me, but if I whack this noise gate up too much, you can see you're starting to cut out projects. Now that's why I found myself, for the way my microphone seems to work, about 40 seems to be the best setting. But I always whack it on there, just play a bit, display light. Now this, and make sure I'm getting rid of really quiet noises, but not killing my general talking in areas like this where I'm a bit quiet. That's the first thing I do, put a noise gate on. Second thing I do is I get hold of a compressor. Now I'm using this thing called George Young's limiter. It's a very nice compressor because what you do is you really just pop in here, you say, right, I want the maximum sound to be, I don't know, something like -2, because I'm going up on the internet. If you're going to broadcast, it'd be totally different. And then the threshold here, you fiddle with it until it sounds good enough but doesn't distort. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at the levels up here that are playing. Now, without the compressor on, setting here, it's popping around here. I really want it to come up into the yellow but not go into the red. So I'm going to turn on the compressor. And what I'm going to do is set a little area to loop. So mark an in and an out point. I want a bit that's loud and I want a bit that's quiet so I can see what it's all going to come out like. Press the loop play button and then fiddle with this. Does become more important if you're doing things like so that the really loud areas there, they go up into the yellow, but they don't quite go up into the red. Now, this does become more important if you're doing things. So now I've got my sound sort of evened out a bit. This is what a compressor does, is it tries to make the loud bits quieter and the quiet bits louder. This lovely little thing just lets you have one slider that does the lot. Normally you'd have to do that, and then you'd have to up the volume and fiddle around a bit. I really like this one because it's nice and simple. Whack it on, say what the maximum is, fiddle with this, watch the levels, job done. Now I've got some settings which I can actually use for every timeline. Because, you know, I'll have lots of timelines, lots of video that I've recorded that I need to chop up. So now what I want to do is save that as a preset. What I also normally do is set up a folder so all my presets go into that, so I know where to look for them rather than going somewhere in here. So I'll come up to the effects list, click on the word effect, and then right click on it and say create new folder. And now I've created a special folder for all my effects for this particular project to go into. I'm then going to select these in the bin, right click on them and say save as preset, and now I've got a preset of those two settings in there, so the next time I bring in a piece of video I can just whack it on there and it's job done. Now having done that, I've now got a bit of noise out of it, and I've also got the sound kind of leveled out and sounding reasonably loud. I'm making it pretty loud because I'm not going off to broadcast. This is generally playback on computers. I want you to be able to play it on an iPad if you want to, or a phone even if you want to, or whatever, and I want people to be able to hear it. So I'm just leveling it out and making it up to about -2. So that's sort of cleaned my sound up. It's still occasionally got sharp intakes of breath. So for example here, of your project, so have a quick look at. You've got a sharp intake of breath there. Now, a lot of people probably wouldn't care about that. It's the sort of thing that irritates me, so I actually spend time getting rid of them. So I'll explain what I do next. You know, it's got rid of some of them, like it's got rid of the sharp intake of breath here. It hasn't got rid of the one around here. Now, the waveform down here is nice because it's showing me the loud bits and the quiet bits, but it's also quite hard to see some of this stuff. I mean, I can make it a bit bigger, but then it starts going off the screen, and that's not very helpful. So what I like to do now is change the way this waveform is displayed. So if you come up to Settings, and then User Settings, Application, Timeline, you have this thing, Waveform, Linear, or the other option is Log. Linear shows you the loud bits and the quiet bits, and the size of it actually tells you roughly how loud it is. If you change it to Log, I'll apply that, you'll notice the whole thing changes. So now my quiet bits actually look rather big. They're still quiet, it hasn't changed how it sounds, it just changes what the waveform looks like. But the nice thing now is I can see some big blobs in here, and these big blobs are generally my sharp intakes of breath, base of your project. So have a quick look at that. But essentially, that I really like to get rid of. And I like to have it like that because it shows me a bigger waveform. It's not quite as refined, it's just a large blobby waveform, but it's still enough for me to work out which of these blobs here is a particular word, but it does also show me these breath things that I'd like to get rid of. So the next thing is I get to one of these breath things, project, so have a quick, how do I get rid of it? I've got two ways of doing it, one of them is totally unique to EDIUS. One is just to chop it out completely. Now you can chop things out just by sticking your cursor over it, pressing the C key to cut it, moving along a bit, select the clip, press the C key to cut it again, then select that bit and then delete it. Well, first of all, you notice in all of this, as I'm doing all this, it's cutting both the video at the top and the sound at the bottom. Now, I don't want to do that. So for a start, I'm going to undo all of this. It's cutting all of it because this audio is linked to this video. And I just want to cut the audio. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to linked selection and turn that off. So now if I select the audio and cut, it just cuts the sound, it doesn't cut the video. Second thing that was happening there is I would cut it, and then it would select this half, move along a bit, and then when I try to cut it again, it's not letting me do anything because this half is selected. Because the keyboard shortcut will go on whatever clip is selected or whatever track is selected. And I find the easiest way around that is to not select the clip at all, but instead select the track. So now I can come along here, cut, and it'll select that. Now I've got it set in the preferences. So if I come to User Settings and Preferences, to select the left clip when cutting. You can turn that off, then what would happen is when I cut it, it selects the clip on this side. I like to have it the other way, so let's just set it so it selects the clip on the left, so that if I'm doing this kind of thing, I can go cut, this bit is automatically selected, so I could just press delete and it gets rid of it. So there we are, I've now chopped out that. That's still more keyboard presses than I actually want. So a much quicker way of doing it is actually have the track selected, come along here and go cut with a C key, move along to where you want the cut to finish, and then I'm going to use the N key. Now the N key will take this clip and it will trim the start to that point. So now I've got the whole thing down to 2 keyboard shortcuts just by having that track selected, C, N, job done. Now that's one way I've got of doing it. It leaves a great big hole, so it leaves a completely silent hole. If you're listening to this on headphones, that's a little bit harsh. It would be nice if it was a bit softer. On the other hand, that's quite quick. Now if I want it to be softer, I'll use something which is fairly unique to EDIUS, which is a thing called V-mute. Because instead of cutting it, what I could do is to turn on the volume, put some points on, and then drag them downwards. So have a quick look at. So in doing that, I'm getting a subtler ramp down. I can even move these across so it does do more of a ramp. So have a quick look at the project. So now listening to that on headphones, it's actually not a direct chop at the end of that word. It's a much smoother ramp down. But obviously I had to click on this, I had to put on 4 points. It was tedious and slow, and I would never actually get anywhere if I did that. What I instead do is I use the V-mute button. So I'm just undoing all this lot to get back to where I started. And I put the button here onto the timeline. If it's not there, you're going to have to add it. But actually I add a keyboard shortcut to it as well. Now what V-mute does is when you click it, it automatically puts in that kind of ramp. Now how big this ramp is really depends on the settings. So if you go up to user settings and then source and then duration, you have this thing down here which is set to add a 5-frame dip. Now I've set it to 5 frames. That's not the default, I've changed it. The 5 frames is how much it dips between there and there. And I want to get rid of a really small bit. You can change that depending on how big your intakes of breath are. I found 5 frames is good. I mean, if I go back in there and I set it to say 1 second, and then do exactly the same thing, you can see I get a much longer ramp down and a much longer ramp up, which is no good because base of your project. So you can hear my voice just tails off there. I want a short one, so I'm going to go in there and I'm going to set 5 frames, which, by a bit of playing, was about what I like. Project, so I can still hear a little bit of intake of breath there, so maybe I want this to be a little bit longer. Now, rather than going and fiddle with these points, I'll actually just go and stick the cursor there and bang it again. And it puts it in another dip. So have a quick look. And then go to the other side and put in another one. And bosh, I have now got a longer dip. Space of your project. So have a quick look at the color space. And it's a lot quicker than going in and putting those points on. But I can do it quicker than that because I've assigned a keyboard shortcut to it. If you look at that, it's got the hash key as the keyboard shortcut for adding a V-mute. So what that means is I can just do this same thing by just going to a particular area and pressing the hash key. And if I get really clever, I'm watching the picture to see what's going on and I'm watching the timeline to see what my sound is like. You know, I can spot these intakes of breath on the timeline. That's one there, that's one there. I can just be playing the timeline. See a bit more about that. But essentially what this does is it changes the way these looks are applied. And it will just get rid of them. Click. So it puts those in, but it carries on playing. So it makes it really quick to get rid of them. Now in this one, I saw it was quite long, so I hit the hash key twice in quick succession. This one was a bit short, I hit the hash key once. But you know, 2 hits, nice big dip, 1 hit, smaller dip. Now I assigned a keyboard shortcut to V-mute by going up to settings and user settings, user interface, keyboard shortcut. Now I'm looking for something that's called V-mute, so let's just type in the word mute. Oh, there it is. And now that I've found that, all I've got to do is just double click on it and it brings up a keyboard and I can select the key that I want this to be changed to. I've already set it to the hash key. You've probably got it set to something else. I selected the hash key because I can get to it very, very easily whilst I'm playing the timeline. Because the next thing I'm going to do is, apart from tidying up the sound, is going to go through and chop out all the bits I don't want. So for example, here we've got a great big gap. Now, I get gaps because I'm pausing, thinking about what I'm about to say next, or I've made a mistake and I'm just redoing it. I've got to get rid of them, and I'll do it quickly. So I'm going to stick the cursor there and mark I for in. Go to here, O for out. I want to chop out everything between those 2 points. So you can right-click up here and you can choose Ripple Delete between in and out points. It has a keyboard shortcut set, which is Alt and D. So I could just go Alt and D and it would get rid of it. But again, I find that having to find 2 buttons on the keyboard is harder than finding 1. And because I'm going to be doing this an awful lot, I will change my Ripple Delete between in and out keyboard shortcut to something else. And I've changed it to the apostrophe. It's also the thing with an @ symbol on it. I've changed it to that key. So now what I've got is two keyboard shortcuts I use a lot are next to each other. The hash key is right next to the apostrophe. So my ripple delete, apostrophe, job done. Listen to a bit more. It's got me destination LUT. It's got the Panasonic destination. Yep, okay, so I fluffed up there. I really want to chop out everything between there and probably about there. Change this so that it's got me Panasonic destination LUT on that. Carry on. Let's see, let's go on to the next bit. Where is the next bit? I don't know, let's zoom. Yep, bosh. So now I've chopped out a huge chunk in the middle. Now, one thing about EDIUS is it doesn't move the playhead. So I've chopped out that bit, but I need to go back to where I marked the in point. And I could start scrolling up and down the timeline, but this is where I start using the A and the S keys. So the A key is going to jump me back to the last edit, which obviously is the one that I've just put in there. So I use the A key a lot because it jumps me straight back to the thing I've just cut out. So you can see what I'm doing there. I'm putting everything on the timeline. I'm watching it, tidying up the audio as I go, and also just going through and chopping out the bits that I don't want. The other thing I'll do sometimes is once I've done a cut on the audio is I'll fiddle with the cut on the video. And I'll just do that to help cover up the fact that I've done a cut. Well, what I'll probably do is grab hold of the join here and move it one way or the other, changing the colour space of your project. And I only do that so the cut on the video doesn't take place at the same point as the cut on the audio, so you notice it less. There are times when I will cut in the middle of a word, but you'll see a jump in the video, so that'll draw your ears to the fact there was a cut in the sound. So again, I'll just grab hold of the join here and move it so it's slightly in a different place. And I'm literally coming down to it, grabbing it right in the middle. You can see I get those two orange brackets, which means I'm doing a rolling edit, and I just grab it and drag. Because the locking is not on, it's not affecting the sound that goes with that, and it's not affecting the microphone that's recorded at the same time either. Again, very important that this thing is off for my kind of editing, because if it's on, I actually start changing the join on the sound as well as the video, which is a bad thing because I don't want to do that because I've worked on the sound and then I fiddled with the picture afterwards. The next thing I have to do is then pan and scan it. So what I do is make up a new sequence, grab the original one. Now I'll normally name these things as well, so I wouldn't leave them as sequence 1 and sequence 2. So let's go back to sequence 1. I'm going to double right click on here and I'm just going to call it color spaces. I'm actually putting little dashes in rather than spaces. Now the reason I'm doing that is at the end of all this, I take all the bits of video and I put them into a program that makes up the interface. My tutorial plays in a web browser. So I've made it up with a web program. It's called Serif Web Plus. It's actually something they've stopped making, but I find it's nice and simple for doing this kind of stuff. What I do is I put in a whole bunch of pages and then it generates all these menus and I can put in lots of descriptions so people can find their way around quite easily. And so I'm doing that using a program that makes up web pages. And I've always found when you're linking to anything in a web page, what you don't want to do is leave spaces. So I always put in dashes or underlines instead of spaces. So that's my original one. I also want sequence 2 to be named the same thing. So I'm just going to double right click, copy, double right click, paste. So they're both called the same thing. And now I've got two sequences which are called color spaces. The way I work is I've got lots and lots of chapters. I've actually got about 500 chapters in the entire tutorial. Each of those chapters has one timeline, which is the edit, and then another timeline, which is the panned and scanned version. So in that case, I'm going to have an awful lot of things with exactly the same names. Here I've got two. It's easy to find out which one it is. I'll just double click on each of them, and it'll open it down here, and I'll know which is which. But when you've got loads and loads and loads, it's a real pain in the neck searching through it. This one here is the original edit. I'll give that a color. So I'm just going to click on where it says color and choose yellow. And now I know that the yellow ones are the original bits and the white ones are the final ones, the ones that have got pans and scans and titles on them. Again, that seems like a very small thing, but actually gets very, very useful. I mean, let's make a few more. So I've got a whole bunch of sequences in here. If I hadn't color coded them, I won't know which is which. Actually, what I tend to do is I will go through and I'll edit everything for an entire section. So like for the color section, I did about 17 chapters. Went through the edit for all of those, got all the sound sorted out, chopped out all the bits I didn't want. So I ended up with a whole bunch of clips up here, and I wanted to make all of the original ones yellow, so I just selected them all, chose that, and they all went yellow. So I now knew that's all my original sequences, and then when I make up a new sequence, that's a panned one. Again, this kind of thing just makes my life a lot easier later on. Now the next step in doing this, I actually have to go through the entire thing and then zoom into bits of it, which is obviously a job for the layout. I also put a title at the start and fade it in and out. So again, I do this for lots and lots of things, quite boring and tedious. I want to try and speed this up as much as possible. Well, the first thing is I want this timeline to be exactly 1 second in. And the easiest way is just to have the timeline ready, go 1, 0, 0, puts the cursor at 1 second, and then as soon as you drag it on, you know it's 1 second in. My next step is to add the title, so every particular chapter has an introductory title. I use VizTitle. Now I have done it with other programs. I've done it with NewBlue Titler Pro, and I've also done it with After Effects if you happen to want to do this stuff in Premiere. And I've got tutorials about how to make this particular title on the website with both of those programs. I still come back to VizTitle because I find it's the quickest of the lot. I mean, I've got a title here which is the same title I use for everything, so I just drag it, pop it onto the timeline, double click on it, and all I've got to do is change the name of the title, which in this case I am going to change to, and then save it. I actually like to use that as the name of the title, so what I'll do is just copy it, then press the Save As button, paste, save it. It's a very quick way of not having to type colour spaces 300 times. And now I've got a title which introduces the chapter. Great thing about VizTitle is that if I did another timeline, all I'd have to do is grab hold of that, pop it onto the timeline, double click on it, change it to something else, save it, and now I've got another title that looks exactly the same but with different words. And it's great the way that you can do that with VizTitle so quickly. I mean, you can go into the full interface and do lots of stuff, but just being able to double click, get into this mini thing, type some words, get out of it, and you've got a fully animated title that plays back for you in real time without any rendering. That just hands down beats all the other titling programs for me. If I'm in Premiere and do it with After Effects, it needs rendering. If I use NewBlue Titler Pro, I can get it to look pretty much the same, but it still needs rendering. Takes time to get out of the titles, it caches and all sorts of things. VizTitle, so quick, in, out, plays it back. Lovely. I then put a crossfade at the start and the end. To do that, I just go and grab hold of a dissolve transition and drop it at the start. But frankly, going and digging through that list of transitions to find it takes me a couple of seconds. So as soon as I've applied one, that means it's in the information window, I'll make sure my tutorials effects folder is selected, and I'll right click on that and say save that as a current user preset. So now I've got my audio filters and the dissolve I use all the time just sitting in that one folder. I don't have to dig around for it elsewhere. I can just go straight to the end of the clip, grab hold of it and dot that on there, and now I've got a fade out. Then I'll sit down here and I'll just watch the whole thing, and I'll go through and zoom into it. So you just open up the layouter, obviously you look at the thing, and then if you want to zoom into it at any particular point, you put in a keyframe, move along a bit, zoom into it so you can see something, move along a bit, put in a keyframe there so it stays at that location between those two, and then move along a bit more, and then do another move on it, or whatever. The way I use to actually zoom in and out so you can see certain bits of the tutorial a bit better. I actually don't move these on a random amount. What I'll do is I'll put in a keyframe, come down to where it's got the time code down here, and I'll just type +200, enter. And that moves my cursor on by 2 seconds. So each of my zoom ins here is always 2 seconds. Again, this is really quite tedious. I've already sat through all of this. I've pretty much got it how I wanted to. So I really want to try and look through this a bit quicker. And what I now do is I will go through it at double speed. So once I've got the layouter up and running here, I'll press the play button to start it playing, and I'm going to use the L key to start it running at double speed. So press it once, it's going 1 speed, press it twice, it's going at 2 speed. And I can watch everything at double speed and just see the bits where I want to do a bit of a zoom in. So I get to this point and I want to do a zoom in, I'll press the button, put a keyframe in, and then move it around. Only trouble is I come out sounding like Pinky and Perky.
Important you get it right. Really?
Yeah, I'm very high pitched. Now I can just about at double speed understand what I'm saying. I have 2 possible ways of getting around it. One is this button, which I've added to the timeline. Now, I've added the button by going up to the user settings, and just like a keyboard shortcut, I've just gone to buttons and then recorder, and then I've looked for play 1.5 times, which is in this list of stuff here, and I've put it next to the play button. So now if I press that, it plays it at 1.5 speed.
Stick it on there and choose the one.
So it's faster, but the sound is more understandable. That's one way around it. What I do is a bit crazier. Because this thing has come out mega high pitched, I'm going to actually put a pitch shifting filter on there to try and compensate for that. So I grab hold of the pitch shifter, put it onto the timeline, open it up and whack that down to 50%. Now if you play that at normal speed, it's sounding a bit weird. But if I played at double speed, it's almost normal.
Now this is mainly to do with really shifting colour spaces around, and it's important you...
So actually what I do when I'm zooming through this is I'll put the pitch shift on, go into the layouter, start the thing playing, and then I'll play it at double speed, and I can actually hear it properly at double speed, or nearly properly, so I can get to the bits where I just want to zoom in and zoom out. I mean, this kind of stuff only works for this kind of thing that I'm doing, where literally I'm taking a long stream of me talking with a couple of screenshots and moving around it. I wouldn't do this if I was doing a drama. Once I've done that, I'll come out of it, and then make sure I just go and turn the pitch shifty thing off. Otherwise, when I export it, I'm going to sound very, very slow. Ever get a version of my tutorial where it sounds like that, you'll realise that I actually forgot to take the pitch shift off when I was doing the layouter. But again, I do that because it speeds my work up. What I would also do, again, because I use that pitch shifter a lot, is make sure the tutorials folder is selected up here, right-click, save as preset, and now I've got my 50% pitch shift set. So again, if I want it, I just leave that thing open, I can grab hold of that, put it on there, I've automatically got the pitch shift added onto a clip. And then finally, I've got my entire edit done and I'm ready to export it. I make up MP4 files. So you'd obviously go File, Export and Print to File. And the obvious way to make up MP4 files is to use this thing, H.264/AVC, and click on that. That's the way EDIUS does it. EDIUS does really, really nice MPEG-4 files. I want to make these things really, really small because I'm going to make a tutorial thing which has got 30 hours worth of video that I want to put on the internet and then people can buy and download. I don't want a 30 gigabyte download, so I'm trying to make them as small as possible. Now the EDIUS H.264 exporter is really good for doing things at low bit rates. I've actually found I can get it a lot lower by using a different way of encoding called X.264, because X.264 has a setting that the EDIUS one doesn't. Now, I don't think this is any good for people doing regular videos which have got actual people moving around and scenery and stuff like that, but it's great for doing screen stuff. Because not much happens in one of my screen videos. There's a lot of me talking and a mouse running around most of the time. This other setting that's in X.264 really helps make those files an awful lot smaller than using a regular H.264 exporter. Now to get this X.264 encoding into EDIUS, I bought a plugin from TMPEG that makes MPEG-4 files, which is why I've got this extra up in my list here. I'm just going to click on Generic Formats, H.264 AVC, and click Export. And then obviously you tell it where it's going to go and you give it a name and all that sort of thing. But the most important thing here is instead of using variable bitrate, which is what I generally use in everything else, I use this thing that says constant quality. That's what EDIUS doesn't have. That's what X.264 has got, and that constant quality really knocks down the size of my tutorial clips. It took my tutorial from being about 12 gigabytes to being about 5 gigabytes. And then obviously I give it a name. My name is going to be Color Spaces, and then you click on Export, and then it goes off and knocks it up. Actually, what I tend to do, instead of just exporting it one at a time, I'll actually use the batch exporter. So I'll choose this and say Add to Batch List. Brings up the same dialog box, you set the same settings, give it a name, export. Now instead of actually tying up EDIUS now, so I can't do anything, it's now added it to the batch export list here. And I'll end up with a large list of things here and I'll just knock it all up at the end of it. Now if you don't have TMPEG or you don't want to buy it, there is a free option. Now to use the free option, I would go File and then Export and Print to File, and I'd make up a Grass Valley HQ file. So again, add that to the batch list, give it a name, but then take it off to this other program called Handbrake, and I can make up the same kind of file. I like to do it all in one, which is why I thought it was worth spending the 70 quid to buy the TMPEG plugin. But again, I wanted to speed that up a little bit. Now, there's simple things like I'm going to call it Color Spaces. So before I go into the exporter, I'm going to double right click on that and copy, Control-C. So now, when I go to make a file, I can just highlight the name up here, paste, saves me typing. The next thing as I do is I use the new thing that's in EDIUS 9 to set a default exporter. When this was introduced, I thought, oh, yeah, that's nice. Didn't actually think it would be that much use. Actually, when it came down to doing this kind of thing where I've got lots of files to export, again, quite a huge time saver. So what I did was I went to export, print to file, and chose the format that I wanted to do. Now I want certain settings to go in here, and just a peculiarity of this particular plugin is that just by saying save as default, it doesn't put any settings in. So what I did actually was to make up one clip, then went to the recently used list, selected the last one that I used, and then I said save as default, bosh. That's now put that in the first default exporter here. Now in previous versions of EDIUS you could save a default exporter, but you'd only have one option. In EDIUS 9 you've got 4 options, and you can do things like assign keyboard shortcuts to them. I'm going to rename it just so I know what it is. So far so good. I haven't really done much apart from set a default. Now you could obviously come up to File, Export, Print to File, choose Print to File Default Exporter and do that, or choose Add to Batch Default Exporter and do that. I just have to put the name in, export, and it adds it to the batch list. Nice thing though is you can either add a button to the timeline, which I've done here, or you can add a keyboard shortcut to it. And it just saves you quite a bit of time, especially when you've got a lot of files to do. Because instead of having to go through menus and search for stuff, you finish it, you press the button, you give it a name. That's just added that into the batch list without me having to go through and search and check settings and everything else. Have a look at the video I did about EDIUS 9.3 where you can see how to add these to the timeline, how to set the default exporter, and how to add keyboard shortcuts to it. But anyway, I hope that's found that useful. It's just a quick roundup of things that I found when I was doing the tutorial editing to try and make it quicker. I just finished reworking a large section of my EDIUS tutorial, so I've just redone the entire effects section. So it's been updated with all the latest stuff that's in EDIUS 8 and EDIUS 9, all the motion tracking, colour correction. As you can see here, I've done something talking about the colour spaces that we've got in EDIUS 9. I've got some interesting things about different ways of keying and actually using the chrominance filter to key, stuff that wasn't in there before. If you've actually bought the tutorial from me in the last year, I'll give you a free update, just get in touch. If you've got an older version of the tutorial, there is a cheaper version if you've got the EDIUS 7 or EDIUS 8 tutorial. Again, you can get those off the website. If you haven't got the tutorial at all, the whole thing is available from my website. There is a list of everything that's on it, but it's about 30 hours worth of stuff, which is why it's very important that I came up with a fancy interface that you could navigate around quite easily and bookmark. But you can order the whole thing off of my website, www.dvctraining.co.uk. Don't forget, of course, you can follow me on Facebook for the latest news on digital video, and of course subscribe to this channel for more videos when they're released. Anyway, I hope you found this video interesting, and I'll see you next time!